You accept, you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of the living God.
Yes.
Because you have believed in Him, in your faith in Him, and you baptize you in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, for the forgiveness of sins and the gift of the Holy Spirit.
Okay, that was Treva Bogan. I think Treva is in the service. There she is. Raise your hand. Congratulations, Treva. Dallas, who baptized her also. Treva's a wonderful person. She's got a sweet little girl named Tilly, and that was a great moment. Yeah, she's here. Okay, what we were seeing there, now we're seeing somebody who in that moment in time is being justified by God, is being forgiven of their sin, is being given the gift of the Holy Spirit, is being placed into Christ, and by God is being placed into the church. So a very important moment. I wonder if Dallas realized it when he was baptized. I think it's been about a year ago now, Dallas, that in such a short time he would be baptizing someone else. Also, Casey Owens and Richard Hurt placed their membership. This was a couple of weeks ago, but I feel like I forgot to mention that in the 9:30 service, so we welcome them to the congregation as well. I want to start off with some pictures of dynamic duos. I'm going to call them dynamic duos. These are teammates. They played on teams together, and they had especially strong chemistry. They had good team chemistry. So I'm going to put the pictures up there. You tell me if you can recognize who they are. If you're familiar with some sports, you may be able to recognize them. They're pretty well known. Okay, let's put the first picture up. Who are these two? Can you name them? Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen were a great duo as they played together for the Bulls. All right, let's show the next picture. This is an older one. I have to go in the Wayback Machine. All right, you recognize Babe Ruth, and who's the other guy? Somebody heard it over here, Lou Gehrig. It's Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth. I think, Barlow, you watched them play, didn't you? All right, so let's put the third picture up there. Who are these two? Magic Johnson. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. That's right, Raul. All right, let's put the next one up.
Here we go.
More recent. Tom Brady. Rob Gronkowski. All right, Tom Brady, Rob Gronkowski. And I think we have one more here.
NFL champs.
Oh, thank you. And you guys recognize this? Karl Malone, I think I heard someone say. And his buddy, John Stockton. All right. Great duos that played together, had wonderful team chemistry. They could almost anticipate each other's moves, and it made them especially effective. And I wanted to start with that today because I want to talk about team chemistry on Team Jesus. So in our sermon series, which is Team Jesus, we are using that analogy for the local church. And we're taking our scripture study as 1 Corinthians chapter 12. And last week we talked about the coach on Team Jesus, of course, is Jesus. And today I want to talk about how important it is for in the local church for us to have good chemistry. And what do we mean by chemistry? I like the way former pro basketball player Brian Freeman defined it. He said team chemistry is a cumulative team attitude. It's the way the team feels about itself and its chances to succeed. Confidence is a big part of it. Each member goes into every game knowing exactly what their role is and what they need to do. And even more importantly, they know that everyone else knows their role and what they will be doing, and they'll do their job. So I want to talk about three things today that contribute to team chemistry in a church from 1 Corinthians chapter 12. Number one, good team chemistry eschews jealousy. Good team, I'm having a hard time saying that. Good team chemistry eschews jealousy. 1 Corinthians 12:14. Paul says, now the body is not made up of one part, but many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason cease to be a part of the body. So in the analogy here, Paul is imagining the local church, the church at Corinth in this case, as a body. And a body obviously has a lot of parts. And the parts in this particular body are whining and complaining. What are they whining and complaining about? It's not because they hurt, not my back hurts or my neck hurts. It's because they want to be a different part of the body. So the foot says, I want to be a hand. And the ear says, I want to be an eye. And the colon says, I don't know what you guys are complaining about. And of course, in the context here, what is going on in Corinth is that different folks in the church were serving in various capacities. And Some of the service was high profile, and some of the service was behind the scenes. So they had different spiritual gifts. Everybody does. We all have a different gift mix, abilities, aptitudes, God-given. You may develop those so you're especially effective in some way, but have a contribution to make to the church. Now, the church at Corinth had been founded by an apostle. Who founded the church in Corinth? The apostle Paul, who's writing this letter. Therefore, he was there. He was present. He started the church. And as an apostle, he could lay hands on people and pass on to them what we would call the supernatural gifts of the Holy Spirit. That's primarily how those gifts were passed on in the day. An apostle would lay hands on someone, and then they would have the ability, for instance, to speak in tongues, which was speaking in a language that they had not themselves studied, whether it was Egyptian or Punic, whatever it may be. Somebody else may be given the ability to interpret languages. So, a person speaking in tongues, and here's an interpreter over there. Someone else may be given the supernatural gift of prophecy. This is a divine message coming, directly inspired by God. High profile. Someone else might have healing miracles. That's going to be a very popular person in the church, whoever the healer is. You got a visitor in the first century, the first Christian church of Corinth. Where's the healing guy? He's over there where that line of people is. So you go get in line. So these were very popular and high-profile gifts. Then there were other gifts. And by the way, in the New Testament, there are 3 places where they have lists of spiritual gifts. Ephesians 4, Romans chapter 12, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, right here. None of them are comprehensive. But some of the other types of gifts that are more behind the scenes that are listed are, for instance, service. Okay, so I have the gift of service. All right, well, go clean the restrooms with that gift. Or, I have the gift of teaching, right? You get to teach the 3rd grade boys in Sunday school. Or I have the gift of generosity. Wonderful. Open up your wallet and start giving. So some people had those types of gifts, and they're saying, I want to be up there on the stage where the rock stars are. I want to be one of those guys. Now, nobody wants my job, the preaching job, but everybody wants to be a rock star like Kent Drake up here and singing and leading praise and being a musician. So anyhow, that's part of what was going on. It was jealousy and it was division over these gifts. If I had to pick a duo that represented what the situation was in Corinth, I'd pick these 2 right here. Remember them? Nancy Kerrigan and Tanya Harding. Now, for those of you who are babies, back in the day, they were competitors in ice skating, and Tanya Harding's husband, or her estranged husband, hired somebody to go and kneecap Nancy Kerrigan so she would not be able to compete against Tanya in the championships. Both of them wound up going to the Olympics anyway. And later on, Tanya Harding, she pled guilty to conspiring to hinder a prosecution. But in the church, we eschew jealousy. I would like to be able to sing like Kent, play an instrument like Susan, or like to look like Jack Martinelli and preach like Bob Russell. But I am what I am, and we have what we have. And so we learn to appreciate what everybody is contributing. And that takes me to the next point. So we eschew jealousy. Number 2, good chemistry appreciates interdependence. Interdependence. Paul continues. Verse 17. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? So again, we're imagining here the church is a body. And the body is the greatest team of all. It's a number of systems that all work together. We have a nervous system, we have a muscular system, we have a skeletal system, we have a digestive system, and all these things, they're interdependent and they're interactive. What would we do with our nervous system if we didn't have a skeleton to drape it on? One of the problems that I have, the whole theory of evolution runs into a roadblock, a problem with what they call irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity. The body is so complex, you need all of those systems present at one time for it to function. The ear can't be present and wait around for a few million years for the eye to develop. You need both of those at the same time. And even within an eye, if you have a cornea, it can't wait for another million years for a retina to develop. You need all of that together to have a functioning eye. Likewise, in the body, we need all the systems, and all of them are interdependent. So we respect and appreciate what everybody contributes. Michael Jordan, he was one of the pictures that we show, and you probably recognize his name. Michael Jordan said, "There are plenty of teams in every sport that have great players and never win titles." By the way, somebody told me on the way out of the 8:30 service, I didn't realize that, this Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was a great player but never won a title. Michael Jordan continues, "Most of the time, those players aren't willing to sacrifice for the greater good of the team. Their unwillingness to sacrifice only makes their individual goals more difficult to achieve. If you think and achieve as a team, the individual accolades will take care of themselves. Talent wins games, but teamwork and intelligence win championships." A few weeks ago, reading in the one-year Bible, is around 1 Samuel chapter 30, reading about David, and this was before David became the king of Israel. He had a number of warriors who were following him at that time, about 600 men. And they were away from their hometown at one point when some Amalekite raiders attacked their hometown of Ziklag. And these raiders took captive, kidnapped the families, the wives, the children, and a lot of plunder, and carried them away. When David and his men returned to Ziklag, they found what had happened, and they began to pursue the raiders. They came to a brook, and as they were crossing the brook, about 1/3 of the men were exhausted, and they couldn't cross the brook, about 200 men. And David said, "All right, you stay here and guard the equipment. We'll be lighter, and we'll continue the pursuit." So he took the 400 men, and from that point, they continued to pursue the raiders, caught up with them, defeated them in battle, got their families back, had all of this plunder. And on the return journey, they get to that brook where those 200 men had stayed behind, and David greeted them, the Bible says, with great joy. However, there were some troublemakers amongst the 400. And those troublemakers said, now wait a minute. These guys did not come with us. They weren't on the front lines. They don't get a share in any of the plunder. Give them their families and send them home. But they're not going to share. And David vetoed that whole idea. He says, nope, it's not going to be that way amongst my people. We share and share alike. Those who guard the equipment and those who are on the front lines. That was his rule from then on. Everybody makes a contribution, whether they're a front-line warrior or they're in the supply lines. It's all important on a team. There's an interdependency there which is appreciated. On Team Jesus, we need all hands on deck, all feet, all ears, all eyes, all colons, everybody on deck for Team Jesus. I want to read you a quote from this book right here, Christ-Centered Coaching. Coach David Holstein is a member of our church. He goes to the 8:30 service, and he wrote this little book. You don't know this because I didn't even bother to mention it last week, but he gave us a box of books, and I was just giving these away to anyone who wanted them, and they were all gone by the end of the 8:30 service. So there weren't any to share in this service or the next service. So he brought me another box of books, and they're back there on one of those back tables in the Welcome Center, so pick one up. They're all signed by Coach David. But anyhow, here's a quote from his book. He had a long career coaching in college, and he writes, "Each of our players had a nameplate that was attached to his locker as our preseason began. This nameplate was large with a blank space to utilize a program called the Star Award System. During games, we would chart such defensive accomplishments as deflections, going to the floor for 50-50 balls, taking charges, defensive rebounds, and block shots. And then on the offensive end, we'd chart field goal and free throw percentage, offensive rebounds, assists, along with other offensive categories. Each nameplate was updated after every game with the appropriate star category if accomplished. The value of the player to the group could be consistently viewed by the team. We even had these categories at some of our team scrimmage practices so that the players who did not get as much playing time would be able to see their value to the group. This took time and effort, but from our perspective, it was worth it. So what the coach was doing right there is just creating a visual so everybody on the team can see the contribution, the value, and the importance of every other person on the team. Even if it was simply the value of having somebody to scrimmage against. You still need somebody good to scrimmage against. You know, a lot of sports in the Olympics are team sports, but there are individual sports as well. And one thing I hadn't thought about until I watched this interview by Jessie Diggins, she's a winter sport person actually. She's a cross-country skier, but she competes as an individual. She won gold, and as she was giving her acceptance, she was praising her team. Now, she's an individual competitor, but she still thinks of herself as being on a team. She said, I want to thank my team. I want to thank my coaches, my assistant coaches, my wax team. So there's always, even behind the individual athletes, there's a team of people that contribute to them and make them successful. And that's, we're saying that about the church, the same thing in the church. That we all work together with chemistry and Team Jesus. Even me, when I'm standing up here, I'm giving a message, and I'm standing up here all by myself, but I'm not really by myself. You got the tech people back there, and Kent's constantly helping me and giving me, you know, I've got the best equipment because Kent wants me to look good and to sound good. And you say, well, he's failing, but you don't know how it would look if he wasn't helping me and how it would sound. But it's always a team effort. And even in the congregation, there's a give and a take. When somebody is talking and you can sense feedback and engagement, I can tell the difference from 8:30 service to 9:45 service to 11 o'clock service in congregational engagement and involvement. And don't tell the others, but this service has always been my favorite service. It's so good. Okay, but you get what I'm saying there. So we appreciate the interdependence that takes place here in our church. And now I'm going to say one more thing. The third thing is this. Good chemistry defers to God. Good chemistry in a church, on a team, defers to God. Verse 18, Paul continues, but in fact, God has arranged the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. So Paul plays the God card right here, and he's telling the Corinthians, just cut that out. That whole jealousy thing, that whole competitive spirit with each other, because God has you here in this church. He has you where he wants you to be. He's talking about Corinth. So defer to God. He's placed you here. This is your gift. This is your contribution. Be content to make that contribution. What is your spiritual gift? Have you ever thought about that? A spiritual gift is an aptitude, it's an ability, it's a skill set. Maybe it could be something you were born with or something that's given you later on by God, and then you develop that. There are different spiritual gifts analysis tests that you can take. They're kind of like a personality test if you've had one of those before. I did one this past week. It was www.spiritualgifts.com. www.spiritualgifts.com. Just for giggles and kicks, I recommend you do this if you've never done it before. It's free. You can go online. It took me about 15 minutes, including registration, to go through the set of questions, at the end of which it tells you automatically what your top 3 gifts, spiritual gifts, may be. I thought it was very accurate. Regardless, they're a lot of fun. So that's something that might be helpful. And maybe there are other ways, just by trying out different ministries where we find where our strengths are and where our weaknesses are. But along the lines of deferring to God, I think that's something that's even more important than serving in our church in the area of our strength or giftedness. Something that's even more important than exercising our gift in service is serving. It's just serving. It's just finding a place and a way to serve, whether it's in the area of our giftedness or not. I can imagine a scenario where somebody might think, well, here's where I'm gifted. There's no opportunity in the church, so I won't do anything. We can't let our gift get in the way of our service. There in Corinth, the tongue speakers were really causing a lot of division. And Paul told them, the tongue speakers back then at that time, he says, if your gift is not needed, then you just put that thing on the back burner, that whole gift thing on the back burner, and find another way to serve. That's what 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, is all about. Love is not jealous. Love does not boast. It is not envious. It does not seek its own. He's telling them, look, you just put that on the back, and you find another way to serve, because that's the loving thing to do. In the book of Acts, we find the Apostle Paul. He was on a journey to Rome as a prisoner. The ship that he was on was wrecked by a typhoon. So he and a couple of hundred other prisoners were on the shore of the island of Miletus. They were all shipwrecked refugees. They're shivering, they're wet, and they're cold. Apostle Paul is one of them. Now, his gift is apostleship, but he didn't say, hey, I'm an apostle. Once we get a church organized here, I'll do some preaching and some teaching and some healing and some miracles. No, the Apostle Paul got up and gathered wood for the fire just like everybody else, because that's what needed to be done right there. Gathering wood was not his gift. It was just what needed to be done. And sometimes we look around in the area of our giftedness that maybe that's not a big need, but there are always things that need to be done. You know, like some of you know, I was out of the preaching ministry for about 7 years, selling software over there in the Orlando area. And so during that time, Tammy and I had joined the Metro Church of Christ in Oviedo. It's a great church. And the area of my giftedness, arguably, is preaching. But you know what? They already had a preacher at the Metro Church of Christ. His name was Dan Holland. They didn't need a preacher. And so I didn't do any preaching. I actually think Dan was a tremendous communicator, and I learned a lot from him just by sitting and being a member of that church and watching him do his thing for 7 years. I think that's one of the reasons maybe I was there. But what they did have a need for was youth sponsors. So Tammy and I were youth sponsors for that 7 years. Not because that's the area of our giftedness, because that's where a need was. And we could fill that need. And part of the encouragement here in this series and today is this very idea. God has you and me in this church at this time so that we can find our area of service on Team Jesus. I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's an accident that I'm here, that you're here, that any of us are here. God puts the body together that he wants at any given time. In 1954, Milan was a small high school in Indiana. They tell me in Indiana the basketball is practically a religion. And the Milan team that year was undersized and undermanned. So the coach, Norman Dale, emphasized passing the ball. He had a rule. I want you to pass the ball at least 3 times before anybody takes a shot. In one of their games, they only had 5 players. They didn't have any substitutes. And the star shooter on the Milan team insisted on taking shots instead of passing the ball, doing the 3-pass rule. So he would not follow the coach's philosophy. And Coach Dale benched that player during a timeout. And he put the remaining 4 players on the floor. Now, when the umpire restarted the game, there's only 4 Milan players on the floor. He looked over the coach and said, "Coach, are you ready?" And the coach said, "Yes, my team is on the floor." So they played 5-on-4. And, of course, Milan lost that game. It was one of only 2 losses during the entire season. He had made his point. And that Milan team went on to win the state championship in Indiana that year. That coach in that season inspired a 1986 movie entitled what? Hoosiers. Hoosiers. That's the story of Hoosiers. I want us to think about this morning as we're thinking and praying and meditating on this message today, maybe leaving and going home. God says, my team is on the floor. This is God's team, and this time and place. There have been other churches come before us. There'll be other churches that come after us. But right here and now, this is Team Jesus. And we defer to God. We find our way to contribute. Because God's team is on the floor.